Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Brent Toellner. I'm the Senior Director of National Programs for Best Friends Animal Society. Welcome to the Best Friends Town Hall on our 2019 data set. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. First of all, I just want to let everyone know that this is our first town hall on the Zoom platform. We've been using GoToMeeting, switched over to Zoom this week, so if there's a technical glitch here and there, you might want to forgive us as we work through some of the intricacies of the new system. But as you come on, if everything went well, you all should be automatically muted for the webinar, and so you don't have to worry about accidentally unmuting yourself. If you have a question, there should be down at the bottom of your screen a Q&A box that will allow you to type in your question. So type in your questions there. We're going to go through some of the high-level pieces of the data for you all to kind of get a high-level overview, and then we'll spend the last 15 to 20 minutes of the presentation tonight going through your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Some of them we will answer just directly to you. Some of them we will do live, but we will try to get to everyone's questions. So, as you're going through this, you might want to keep an eye on the chat box. We may be sharing some resources with you. And then, this webinar is being recorded, so you will have the ability to share it tomorrow once we get it posted on the network town hall page live. Then when you're all done with this, if you still want more information on the data set and some of the new exciting information, you can go to the Best Friends podcast, and this is episode 19 on the new data set is here. So with that, I'm going to start by introducing our two panelists. If you all would like to come on. There's Vicki Kilmer. There's Teresa Salamone. Vicki, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, Vicki Kilmer. I'm the Director of Business Intelligence and Strategy, and I'm coming up on 14 years with Best Friends.
And Teresa.
I am the Senior Manager of Business Intelligence and Strategy, and I've been here about 6 years.
And so to let everyone know, so Vicki and Teresa are two of the members of our Business Intelligence and Strategy team here at Best Friends. We've got really two teams that are responsible for the data set that we work with and that we're going to be sharing out information from tonight. We've got our enterprise data team, which is responsible for a lot of the data collection, getting it in a warehouse so that the data is sortable and manipulated, able to be manipulated so we can read stories into them. Vicki and Teresa's team are very responsible for how this data is presented out and how we share out that data and what insights we can glean from those as we prepare strategies for 2025. So they're very, very vital part of the Best Friends team. Without that, we would not have a great strategy because it would be based on how we feel and not on the actual data. And so we rely very heavily on them for the work that we do and prioritizing the work that we do. So with that, I think Vicki's pulling up some of the PowerPoint slides, and we're just going to kind of talk through some of the highlights of the data set. So Vicki, tonight we're talking about the data set. It was released earlier today. But I kind of want to go back to the beginning of this project, which started back in 2016. 2016 at the Best Friends National Conference, Julie Castle, our CEO, put her stake in the ground that Best Friends is going to help get the nation to no-kill by 2025. It was super intimidating at the time, but I think probably more intimidating because we didn't actually know how many animals were dying then. So tell us about this, how that kicked off and started this project and why getting all of this data together has been important.
Sure. So immediately on the heels of that conference, we established, I think it was 13 different teams, and we had this crazy tight timeline. It was like a month and a half or 2 months. And one of those teams, which was led by Mark Peralta, was, we've got shelter animals count, and let's leverage everything we can there, but try in a very feverish effort to go grab as much incremental shelter data as we can so that we can get as close to a national picture as possible, to just be able to even know our base, and as importantly, be able to prioritize, like, what does year one of this look like? Where do we go? Where do we focus? And we had to have the data to do that. So it was a huge effort, a large team of staff, as well as a lot of volunteers scurrying around to bring as much data in-house as possible. And that was our first year doing it. We've certainly gotten the process to be a little less crazy and more refined over time, but that's what started the ball rolling in what has been more and more data each year, and really instrumental to guiding our strategies.
Outstanding. And so you mentioned Shelter Animals Count. So Shelter Animals Count obviously is a national resource for information on data, on shelter data. You're actually a founding board member of Shelter Animals Count, so you know it very, very well. There's also been a lot of information shared through COVID by Pet Health from their Pet Point database. So tell us a little bit about like how this data set is different from some of the other data sets that are out there.
Sure. So I'm going to pull up a visual for you, but I'll add to this. So Shelter Animals Count is for both shelter and rescue data. Pet Point, when they stepped forward at the beginning of COVID to be able to offer the industry real-time data, which ours is not real-time data, obviously. We're here in June talking about 2019 data. So that was a huge asset for them to step forward with that. Their data that many of us have been on the calls with them each week monitoring and talking through is also rescue and shelter data. Whereas the data set we're going to be talking about today with Best Friends is exclusively shelter data. It is brick and mortar shelters. While we do have rescue data, it does not fold into part of this data set. And there's quite a difference in the volume. And so this slide talks about the volume. I won't read through that because you guys can see it. But one of the biggest differences is just that composition of rescues and shelters versus just shelters. The other is the frequency. Ours is we take full calendar year summary data, whereas Shelter Animals Count, participants update their data on a monthly basis. And of course, Pet Point is real time because they have the data because people are using it day in and day out for shelter management. So some of the differences there, and certainly in terms of purpose, it was such an asset to be able to have Shelter Animals Count as the foundation when, as you put it, Julie put her stake in the ground. And so we had the luxury of building on that and being able to leverage the basic data matrix, which Shelter Animals Counts owns and its database mirrors. And that has been the basis for our data collection as well. So it just really grew on that to be able to look at the largest shelter-specific population possible.
And I think that that's really important. So, out of the not even quite 5,000 shelters nationwide, we have data in this data set that represents more than 3,600 brick and mortar shelters. And I know we'll get into some specifics about how much volume that is here in a second. But I think it's amazing to me that when we started this in 2016, like most of the estimates on how many animals were dying in shelters was based on really having information on maybe 2 or 3 dozen shelters and then aggregating that across the entire country based on population estimates. And to know that we have actual data on more than 3,600 shelters is pretty incredible at this point. So tell me then how Best Friends has gone about getting the data, how much data is in there, and just sort of some of the highlights of like where we don't have data, how we're accounting for that absence of data.
Sure. So the 3,608 brick and mortar shelters, I've put the breakdown there. Many of you may be interested in how that breaks down by org type. We source those through a variety of sources. We have, if you guys don't use the Shelter Animals Count Coalition Builder, use it. It's amazing. So Best Friends has coalitions through that coalition builder tool on shelter animals count. And what that basically does is provide almost a double opt-in. Like shelters are opting into to shelter animals count, but then they're secondarily opting in to be part of a Best Friends coalition, providing access to us of their data. And it requires nothing additional on their part other than saying, yes, I want to join. So that's a large part of it, is being able to get data through that powerful coalition builder tool. And then beyond that, we leverage state mandated reporting, public websites where we're unable to get data. Some is directly provided to us. And when all of those other sources fail, we do initiate a FOIA process. One of the differences I should have mentioned on the prior slide is that Shelter Animals Count from the outset wanted to be a voluntary reporting database. And so because of that, it's all opt-in to participants. So things like state reporting are automatically folded into that. So that would be a good example of where we can get incremental data that we do pull into our data set.
And one of the things for people who aren't familiar with acronyms, the FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act request, has various names in different states, but there's actually a process that government entities have to surrender data to their constituents, and so we're able to get that through that Freedom of Information Act.
Thanks for catching me on my acronyms. Keep me.
Yes.
Yeah. So that leaves, so let me back up a second, because this was an important development a little over a year ago, is one of the things we did that we hadn't done out of the gate was to actually go through the process of identifying every shelter in the country and creating a master shelter list. And that master shelter list, as it stands right now, is 4,850 shelters. So that means that right now we have 1,242 shelters for which we do not have a data source. We do go about our data collection really prioritizing the larger shelters because we're trying to account for the majority of animals. That's what we're really after. So the 1,242 do tend to be smaller shelters, but they are not present in the data set because we could not locate a data source for them. And so the way in which we handle those is we go through an estimation process that basically goes region by region. We have 8 regions, the way we divide the country up. And we take the known data in a given region and do per capita rates and apply that on a per capita basis to the communities for the shelters for which we're missing. And so that's, in its simplest form, how the estimations are derived. We do call this the 2019 data set, but like we've done each year, we always want real data over estimates. So where 2019 calendar year data is not available, if we are able to get 2018 data, we go ahead and pull that in as opposed to adding to our estimation pot. And this year we went 1 year further back, a very small percentage you can see there for 2017. But we, again, made the call that it's still better to have that data than to resort to an estimation process. So you can see how the data divides out with the certainly vast majority being 2019 data. In terms of its representation, while it's 74% of shelters, because of my point earlier that we really do try to prioritize the larger shelters for data collection, it's actually 92% of intake. So we're down now to just estimating 8% of the animals in the country. And as I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about the data, we're talking about the same data fields as the basic data matrix. So intake and outcome types by dog and cat and by age where age is provided.
Awesome. So all of that has been methodology, how we got from point A to point B and have a data set with 3,600 shelters. So what are some highlights of the 2019 data set?
Yeah, let's get into the good stuff, right?
Let's get into the stuff people are here for.
So for the first time since we've been doing this, so the 2015 calendar year was our first year doing our own data collection. And this is the first time that we started to see intake go up. So in each of our prior data sets, intake was going down, not significantly, usually by about 2%, but we are seeing for the first time, even though very minimal, intake inching up. Our non-live outcomes captured here as deaths, but if you're talking in basic data matrix format, it's all of your non-live outcomes were down over 10%. And our life-saving gap, that is our whole 2025 goal and what we're solving for, we saw what we wanted to see, a 14.7% decrease in that life-saving gap, which was even as a percentage higher than last year, which was 14.3%. For our no-kill objective, we're always looking at how are no-kill communities and shelters growing, and we do a lot of analysis as well about the composition of those communities, no-kill versus non-no-kill, et cetera. But the really fascinating thing was the leap this year of both. So no-kill communities shot up 27%. Last year, that increase was 8%, and we were really excited about the 8% at the time. But major increases in no-kill communities this year, now down to just under 5,500. And you can see below that, communities as they're defined here, by the way, are the US Census Bureau's incorporated places. And of those incorporated places, there are 15,753 that actually have sheltering services. So that comes out to about a 35% penetration rate for no-kill. Moving on to no-kill shelters, we saw some of the same, a 15% increase year over year. Last year was 5%, to now 26 no-kill shelters in the country. And so out of the 4,850, now granted, we don't have data on them all, so some of them may be no-kill, but we have no way to know that for the data that's missing. But what we can say is that 44% of every shelter we know of in the nation is now no-kill. And that equates to 59% of the shelters for which we have data. And then we also always look at national save rate, and that is up as well, now to just over 79%, a 2.4 percentage point increase.
Hey, Vicki, can you help us out, because there's a question that came through that I think is super relevant on this slide. Can you define what a no-kill community is for us in this context?
Sure. So a community would, all of the shelters servicing that community would independently need to be at a 90% save rate for that community in total to be considered a no-kill community.
Outstanding. So this is impressive. So 14.7% fewer animals being killed in shelters, 15% increase in no-kill shelters, and a 27% increase in communities. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about how this has trended out over time.
Sure. So this is a really busy chart, but it's actually one of my favorites. So when we started with the 2015 data back in 2016, that's our first kind of starting point there. And we were not even honestly counting or qualifying no-kill shelters and no-kill communities at that point. So that is not to say when you see those two lines at zero that it was zero. We didn't even know at that point. But you can see that the blue bars, our life-saving progress, we were at over 1.7 million dogs and cats killed in 2015. And you can see the awesome decline over time. That decline is starting to slow a little bit, which we certainly have anticipated as we get to trying to, place more challenging animals. You can see really big leaps there in the first couple of years. And then overlaying that with the lines, you can see in red the growth of no-kill shelters over that same time frame. And then in orange, the growth of no-kill communities over that time frame to where we are today.
And one of the reasons why the no-kill shelter line and the no-kill communities line are different is because obviously there are shelters that serve more than one community. So like if you have a county shelter that has, that serves 12 communities within the same county and it becomes no-kill, then it's one shelter, but it includes 12 communities. So, so that people understand where that number's coming from. So, okay, these numbers are trending in the right direction. So like what's been the verdict since 2016 when we put the stake in the ground? Like sum this up for us.
This is the summary slide. So since Julie surprised many of us at the conference by planting the stake in the ground, we have had a 58% decrease cumulatively. So that timeline you were just looking at, a cumulative decrease in the life-saving gap of 58%, which equates to 2.3 million more animals that have been saved through targeted programming that in shelters where dogs and cats needed the most help. So that's the sum for you.
That's awesome. And so you mentioned a term right there, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I have a question about it in the Q&A. So when you reference life-saving gap, what does that number mean when you use it?
So I'll try to explain it without getting too technical, but it's kind of hard not to. So we look at all non-live outcomes, and because our, not just our, but the no-kill benchmark is traditionally thought to be in that 90% zone, we take all of the non-live outcomes and we take that 10% of intake. I need to come up with a better word than allowable, but in the absence of a better word, and subtract that from the non-live outcomes. And that is what we're solving for. So we're not trying to solve for, true euthanasia. True euthanasia needs to happen. So the life-saving gap is that balance that we're trying to solve for, where lives can be saved and we should be saving them. So I don't know, Brent, if that did it for you on life-saving.
Yeah, so basically it is the gap between the number of animals that are being killed at the shelter now and getting to a 90% save rate for every individual shelter.
You got it.
So, so that helps a lot with that. So this is great. Obviously, 2.3 million animals more saved than have been saved since 2016, decreasing that life-saving gap, that gap to 90% by 58% over the last 4 years is incredible. So super excited about that, but it's still not the same everywhere. So talk to us a little bit about what it looks like from a regional basis.
Sure. So my next two charts, visuals, are going to be formatted the same, but they're looking at two different things. And what this is intended to do is really dive down into a species view by state. This first view is intake. And you can see that the dog and cat priority is very different from state to state in terms of intake. But when we flip to the next view, which are the life-saving gap, it gets even more dramatically different, with only 3 states having more dogs dying than cats. And that's DC, Rhode Island, and Mississippi. And
just so everyone's clear, so when you see the picture on the individual state, if it's a picture of a cat, that means there are more cats dying there than dogs. And if there's a dog there, there's more dogs dying than cats. And if they're both there, then it's kind of an equal numbers. Did I read that right?
You sure did.
Awesome. And I think one of the other things that really jumps out on this is there's a kind of a disparity between cats and dogs.
Yeah, and it's a growing disparity. So last year, the 2018 data set, we realized that we were nearing a 2-to-1 ratio of cats dying to every one dog. This year, it's even more than that. So despite the fact that dog intake is actually 10% higher than cats, more than 2 cats are now dying for every 1 dog. So definite disparity.
So definitely a need on cats out there. So we know that there are challenges with cats, that 2 out of every 3 animals that are dying in the shelters are cats. But let's talk regions of the country for a minute. Last year, there were 5 states that made up 50% of all of the shelter deaths. So like literally half of all the shelter deaths were happening in just a small number of states. What does that look like with the new data?
Some interesting changes. So this is another kind of busy one, but I'll try to walk you guys through it. So on the left, 2018 column, were the top 5 states last year. And when we say top 5 states, it's the 5 states that were making up over half of the nation's entire life-saving gap. And those were Texas, California, North Carolina, Florida, and Georgia, in that order. Some really significant changes, if you're already glancing at the 2019 column, we had such incredible progress in Texas. So go Texas for all you Texans on the phone. 17,603 incremental dogs and cats saved in Texas this year, over 15% life-saving improvement. And while California had tremendous life-saving improvement as well, the dramatic improvement in Texas actually moved it to the number 2 slot, and California up to number 1. So that was the first really big shift due to the progress that we saw. And the second shift was also due to progress. Georgia came in strong last year and had an over 30% increase in life saving, which moved it out of the top 5 and Louisiana into the number 5 slot. Also, probably important to note, because the whole reason of this prioritization is, where do we go? We have finite resources. How do we invest? How do we make investments? Where do we put our people? That was the whole point of why we started looking at this state ranking. And so over the last year, we really focused in on that former top 5. And so we always want to look at, well, collectively, how do we do? And collectively, we were, the broad we, all of us, were able to save almost 59,000 more dogs and cats in those 5 states. So 55% of the nation's improvement in life-saving came from those 5 states. One other way that we look at prioritization is also at a shelter level. So we certainly do it at a state level, but we also do it at a shelter level. And it's kind of fascinating that I wanted to share, because I don't know if it's common knowledge, but we have now, for this new data set, 100 shelters that actually account for 41% of the nation's life-saving gap. So it's 2 different ways to look at the data, 2 different ways to prioritize, but such a concentration that it's really compelling and is very, very easy to guide strategically on where we need to be focusing.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, obviously that was the whole point, right? So
Yep.
The more that we knew about where animals were dying and where the places with a greater need was, the better we could allocate resources, not only our resources, but many of our network partners who handle transport, who handle adoptions, who, like, their own local community may be no kill, and they're looking for new communities to help. Like, we've been able to help assist other organizations and where they channel their resources, and I think it's making a tremendous impact. And you obviously see it there. Like, I mean, kudos to really all of those states for tremendous life-saving success as we've moved forward. You know, when you look at something like Georgia at 30% of their gap closed in such a short amount of time, that's just simply incredible. So there's a question that came up over here, and I think that it's a really important one before we move forward so that people can understand. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between save rate and live release rate? Best Friends uses save rate. There's another calculation, live release rate out there. Why do we choose one over the other, and what's the difference? Just so people can generally broadly understand.
Sure. So our save rate, most simply put, is intake minus all non-live outcomes divided by intake. And we don't parse out non-live outcomes because otherwise we wouldn't be able to call it a save if it was a non-live outcome. So
by non-live outcomes, you're meaning died in care, owner requested euthanasia,
died in care, lost in
care,
care,
and
yep,
as well as euthanized.
exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
And then for a live release, when that's a calculation, that is usually based on the number of live outcomes that have, or the number of outcomes, what percent of them were live. So it's not based on, it's outcome based as opposed to intake based. And so just because there are different ways of calculating, I think, you know, I think there are pros and cons of each of them. But Best Friends does use save rate for a lot of reasons. So there's another question in here from Tara, and I'm going to go ahead and ask it now because she's taking my job away and teeing up the next thing we're going to talk about. But is it harder to maintain no-kill status as opposed to reaching it in the first place?
Yeah, so do you want me to go fast
Do it.
to that slide? All right. So by the way, there's what everything looks like now. Go to the website and you can drill down in it. But the 5 states that we just talked about are there in red and orange. And the yellow states are the next tier. So red plus orange, 50% of the life-saving gap. Plus yellow, 75% of the life-saving gap. So that's what the color coding denotes. The I gotta call out the dark green because that's our favorite. So the dark green little speck over on the right, that's Delaware, who remains our only no-kill state. But I will tell you, Rhode Island is catching up really quick. Okay.
Yay for Rhode Island.
Now to sustainability. Keep rolling, Brent.
Keep rolling. Sorry, I skipped ahead on you.
That's okay. So we dug into some analysis on this over the last year, and then of course got the 2019 data in and wanted to revisit it and see if it still held true, and it did still hold true. And it was some pretty promising news on the sustainability front. So first, the longer that a shelter is no-kill, the more likely they are to remain no-kill. Over 91% of shelters that had achieved a 90% save rate remain at that rate or above the following year. So you're looking at a 9% drop-off. Of that drop-off, half of the shelters that lose no-kill status return to being no-kill in the subsequent year. I hope that that answers the question.
That most certainly does, and it's huge, you know, and I think it was interesting because in my mind when we first started talking about all of this, I was like, you know, I can't think of a community that became no-kill and then backslid tremendously. Like they went through all the work to invest in all the programs, and usually there's a lot of public support around that's required for a community to get to no-kill. I was like, I can't think of anybody who's really backslid. I wonder if that's true or whether I just don't know. And so this really validates that most are able to sustain. I think, I'm not saying it's easy. I think it's probably very, very hard for most of the shelters to sustain, especially the second year. But even if they do fall off, they're able to regain that area coming quickly. But kind of to that point, tell me a little bit about the importance of all of this to the community. We did some research on this not too long ago as well.
Yeah, we did. So this is unrelated to the data set and yet directly related to the data set. So we did a general population survey back in January. We typically do those at least annually. And we wanted to add some public perception, public awareness questions that we hadn't asked previously. And got some pretty, to me, very surprising results back. So we were trying to understand, does the general public know what no-kill is? Have they heard the term? Do they know what it means? And what do they think of that? And there was a really high, surprisingly to me, high knowledge base for the term no-kill. But beyond that, 81% of our respondents, and this was nationwide, 81% said that it was very important to absolutely essential. So it was 5 point, very important for absolutely essential 5 to have no-kill shelters in their area. So 81%. And then beyond that, we said, well, what action would you be willing to take to actually be part of making that happen? And again, we saw that not only do people think it's really important, but they're willing to step up and be part of making their community evolve to that place. So over half of the respondents nationwide said they would sign a petition to require no-kill shelters in their area or donate to their local shelter or rescue group toward that end.
And I think that's really important because I think for too long, there's been this divide where it almost felt like the community and the shelter were working against each other and there was animosity there. And I think we've shown that when everybody is on board for saving lives and they're working together, it propels things a lot forward. And there's a lot of community support for saving animals in shelters. And I think most of the shelter staffs out there want to save as many animals as possible. And so when they continue to work together, I think that's why we're starting to see some of the results that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So part of this process for us at Best Friends was we wanted to pull the data together so that we had the data for us and for us prioritizing programs, but I don't think that was necessarily enough. We wanted to be sure to have the data available for the public to be able to go out, find out what's going on in their community, find out just how they can get involved in their community and feel a way of like that whole 625,000 number feels almost insurmountable, but when you dive into a local level, it's like, well, maybe I can solve this in my community or be a part of this solution for that. So tell us a little bit about how this data is going to be made available to the public.
Sure, and I'm going to actually backtrack a little bit to slide into that question because the one stat that isn't on this slide that was equally interesting, and I should probably add it, is that the knowledge was really high, the energy and level of support was really high, but when we asked them, do you know if your local shelter is no-kill, it was like 42%. So a big drop off in actual knowledge locally. And I think that ties into where you were going, Brent, in that, as we're going through the years and we're getting, all this increased data, it was Holly Sizemore's brainchild to say, is there a way that we can package this up in a non-data-y way to share that with the public and to encourage communities to know what's going on with their local shelters, but more importantly, to get involved and understand where help is needed and what role they can play. So I think that these survey results really just played into the development of that tool so nicely. We didn't even know these results back then because we launched the dashboard a year ago. But there definitely is a desire there and there's a knowledge gap currently and people want to know and they want to help.
So real quickly, because this question just came through, when was this specific piece of research done?
This was done in late January this year.
So very recently.
Yes.
Outstanding.
And it was about right shy of a 2,000 sample nationwide. And we also oversampled in our regional center cities. And interestingly, that 81% was much higher in our regional center cities.
Yep. So tell us about how the data is made public. Oh, now hang on. I jumped ahead again. Sorry. Go ahead.
And this was the slide you wanted added. So we thought it odd to sit here and talk about all of this 2019 data when the world has dramatically changed since then. And we certainly know that the sheltering model changed significantly throughout the COVID period. So we wanted to just touch on this as part of talking data with you guys today. This is, I will just disclose, this is not our data. This is PetPoint's data. This is a cumulative view of the weekly reports that they have been providing to the whole industry with a same time frame, 2019 over 2020. And, you know, a lot of these bullets aren't going to be shocking to you guys because you've been getting the reports too, but, you know, tremendous reduction in intake, over 46%. The life-saving gap, which we defined earlier, way down. So that's a good stat to see. Accordingly, we're seeing save rate almost 3 percentage points higher than the same time frame last year. Interestingly, if you look at the dog and cat ratios, so if you go under the killed 2020 column, 4163 for cats, 300 for dogs. Interestingly, during this time frame, we're even seeing a widening of that dog-cat ratio that we talked about earlier from the 2019 data. So that disparity, at least during COVID, became even greater. And then we didn't want to end without a note on fosters because, you know, there was so much anecdotally about the shelters are all emptying and every animal is in foster care. And so just, again, through the insights from PetPoint and their weekly reports, you know, we see that the cat foster starts were actually lower throughout April and May than they were the year prior. And even though dog foster starts did increase, they returned to prior year levels by the end of April. So just there certainly was a fostering effect that I think we're all encouraged by, but just to put actual data behind how extreme or not that effect was.
Yeah, and I think the dog and cat disparity, it probably didn't help that a lot of these numbers are appearing during what would be traditionally kitten season.
Yep.
Which is obviously impacting a lot of shelters. But it is nice to be able to look at this, you know, even though it's a smaller data set, being able to have the 2019 data set as a baseline and understanding what's happening from a baseline perspective, and then to kind of knowing comparatively what's going on, I think is sort of gives us an eye toward what we might be starting to look at in 2020 when that data set is complete, you know, because we're almost halfway through the year now.
Believe it or not.
Yeah.
Now we'll move to your slide.
Yes, I've been impatient.
So as Brent said, the new dashboard, or really the same dashboard, but with the new data and a new name, we've retitled it the Pet Lifesaving Dashboard, which is a little more descriptive of what it actually is. That launched this morning. It's out on our website. The navigation there on your right is how you go about finding it. And again, this enables national, state, community, and shelter-specific views, which Teresa is going to show you real time here in a second. And just to reiterate, the purpose is really bringing this data forward to educate and engage the public in community support for their local shelters. That was the as I called it, Holly's brainchild. That was the whole intent on the heavy lifting that went into that build last year. And we're excited about it launching today with the updated data. So shall I turn it over to Teresa from there?
Please, Teresa, show us around.
All right, just give me a minute to pull my screen up here. All right, guys, as Vicki said, we did change it from Community Lifesaving Dashboard to Pet Lifesaving Dashboard. When you first go there, you're going to see just the nation as a whole, and it's color-coded, like you can see, for example, oh, didn't mean to click that. Sorry. Let me go back. Was trying to hover. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's see. At least I have a dog screensaver. Here we go. Sorry about that. So you're going to see the nation as a whole, and you'll see, like, for example, Pennsylvania, which is where I am right now. It's that light green. So you'll see on the legend we have fewer than 11,000 animals that need to be saved. So you just hover over. So from here, if you want to drill down into a state, we're going to go with Florida. I haven't clicked yet. I'm just hovering, and it's going to show you all that high level data, like how many no-kill communities, how many entered shelters, how many were saved, and how many need to be killed. So we have that. And also, if you hover over this information bar, this is the national view, but it will give you more information there as well. So I just want to point that out. If you click on the state, it's going to take you to a closer view of the state, and each community is represented by a dot. So as I said, I'm from Pennsylvania, not Florida, and I want to look at Jacksonville. Well, I have no idea really where Jacksonville is. It's somewhere around here. I don't know. So here's an easy way to find it. When you're in the dashboard, you're just going to click that search arrow. And when you go there, whoop, if you have better typing skills than I do, you're going to see, okay, Jacksonville, Florida. And you can also put your zip code in there. So it's not just by name, by city name or area name, but you can put the zip code in if you know what it is. So you'll see, okay, Jacksonville came up. Let's hover over that. Gives you a little bit more information there, but you're going to click to see what's happening in the community. So once it pops up, you're going to see which shelters actually serve the community. And while there are other shelters nearby, the ones with the house icons are the ones that serve the community. And then over here on the right, you're going to see the overall save rate in Jacksonville. You're going to see, so we see that there's 2 shelters there. One's no kill, one's 0 no kill. And then if we click on the house icon, we're going to take a look at Jacksonville Humane Society, see how they're doing. They are no kill. And you're going to see their save rate, how many entered, how many were saved, dogs versus cats. And then Jacksonville Humane has done a nice job because they actually gave us their own message, which if you don't do your own message, there's something there that's kind of just text, but you can definitely do your own message, and that you can find that on this page a little bit lower down. There's an area where you can click a button and enter your own narrative, we call it. But also, cool thing, if you hit visit their website, it's going to open up Jacksonville Humane Society's website. And we've collected most websites. If you go on there and your shelter's website is wrong, we are happy to fix it. Just shoot us an email and we will we'll get going there. Okay, I'm just going to click there because I can't get it to, okay. But if you want to if you have things on your website that you want to talk about, like, hey, we need help with this, we need help with fostering, we need pet food, this is a great opportunity. And that the whole idea is we're driving people to you to help you. So, that's about it. I mean, I think the coolest thing, or one of the very cool things about it that a lot of people don't know about it, like I said, it really is the, that search feature. And that only comes up like if you kind of hover over a little bit. So when you're on that state view, I'm sorry, that community view.
And so I think that's a really important piece of it, because obviously the goal for this is to get the community involved in their local shelter at the local level. I mean, that's where they're going to be most able to help out and support. And so the ability for the shelters to provide their own narrative, to explain kind of the intricacies of what's going on in their community, where they need the most help, but also linking to the website for that resource, that's a big part of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
If you go back, Teresa, to the state view.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking. Oh, go into Florida again.
Hang on. Sometimes you got to click that little home button.
So if you look at this, for folks that are kind of new to this, obviously there are different colors of what those communities are. Can you tell us a little bit about what those colors are? Sure.
There's actually a legend right below here, and you can hover over and it'll actually give you a description. So the dark green is no kill, which I know Vicki explained is the save rate of 90% or greater. And then you have nearly no kill, which is 85 to 89.99. maybe a couple nines after that, but anything under 90. And then you have not yet no kill. And that is anything below 85%. And then we do have some areas that we don't have shelter data on. So those are going to be the light gray areas. So if you get lost on any, because there is a legend for each of these, we call them views, you know, whether it's the national view, the state view, community or shelter view, there is a legend below each of those. And all you have to do is hover over and get more information. And then, like I said, since we're in Florida, you can also get a lot more data just by hovering over that information bar. Don't click it because it'll take you to the methodology, but if you just hover over, you'll see a lot of information there, like how many no-kill shelters and all that kind of stuff for the state.
And there was a specific question in the Q&A that was asking about the list of communities that we didn't have data for. And so this is one of the ways that somebody can get that so that they know around them or in their general vicinity or in their state, some of the shelters that we don't have data for some of those gaps. And if you happen to find a shelter in there that you know the data or you have access to the data and it's not in there, like, please pass it along. Our goal is never to leave anybody out. We obviously want to make this as comprehensive as possible. It's just, you know, sometimes people don't respond to us or our emails end up in spam filters or whatever. So yeah, submit whatever you need to.
Yeah, Brent, I just wanted to, I scrolled down this page a little bit, and do you volunteer or work for an animal shelter? There's a form right there. And even if you don't volunteer or work for them, I think you can go to that form and fill it out and you can get some more information. And then if you ever forget this tutorial that I just showed you, then up on the higher, on the page a little bit higher, watch a video tutorial. And we do actually have, you know, much quicker than I did it. It'll run through for you how to get down to your community and shelter level.
And that web address, again, is bestfriends.org. 2025-goal is where you can find it if you're going straight to it or from the navigation bar that Vicki showed you.
Navigation bar, no kill 2025. We have, you know, a few things there you can click on.
So with that, we've got a few questions that remain unanswered. So I'm going to go through and we'll see if we can knock these out. If anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to submit them and we'll see what we can get through here in the last 10 minutes or so. Question number 1 from Bernie, is there any plans to include small animals, birds, rodents, etc., and barn animals in the future?
Are you talking to me?
I am tossing that to you, Vicki.
Okay. So we are, and I have to, we means different things for me because I also serve on the Shelter Animals Count Board. So the we I was going for was the Shelter Animals Count Board. We're actually in discussions right now about expanding the basic data matrix, not just from a species perspective, but also for a lot of the sheltering services that fall outside of intake and outcome. So definitely on the docket. I won't speak to a time frame for that, but it's definitely on the radar. And we've just had a series of strategic planning meetings with Shelter Animals Count over the last month and a half. And that has been a large part of the discussions. And there's definitely a lot of interest and support for that expansion.
And from a Best Friends perspective, I think our goal for No Kill 2025 is focused very much around dogs and cats. Obviously, we care about other animals that enter the shelters and we want to do right and do well by them. But at this point, because there's a lot of disparity around how shelters track and handle different forms of wildlife and different types of farm animals and stuff, it became kind of untenable to try to solve for every different type of species out there. So next question, where does this data leave us in realistically reaching the national no-kill by 2025? Vicki, do you want me to answer that, or do you want to answer that?
Go for it. Since you offered.
You know, obviously it's very promising. You know, we've closed 58% of the gap in 4 years. We've got 5 years left. So if we made the same margin and closure of the gap every year for the next 5 years, I think we're there. The challenge is, I think, as we get further, get closer and closer to that 90% benchmark, you get tougher animals to solve for. And I think it's going to be more challenging as we get closer and closer to the goal. I think the large margins that we've had are going to be a challenge. But I also think we've got some really, like, we know what the solutions are. We know how to solve for it. We know we've got 2,000 plus no-kill shelters out there. We've seen various different models of how to create the life-saving that's needed. Obviously, there's a big need for cats and solving for that. But we also have now, you know, I remember when I was first working in a shelter in 2012, and there weren't a lot of places that had achieved no kill that you could really even call and get information from, of like, what did you do when you got to this point? And now there are a lot of successful shelters out there, and I think all of them have been more than willing to reach out and share their success and share their stories. And so I feel like there's going to be, because there's so much positive momentum and so many more people who can help, I feel like this is sort of the snowball going downhill, and it's just picking up steam as it goes. I feel like we're in a little bit of that territory right now. So I feel like it's very doable, but it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of collaboration for us to get there. So let me go to this one. So this is going to the COVID slide, Vicki. So I wanted you to answer this because you've been going to all the meetings on it. Would the lower foster starts in April and May be a result of the dramatic decrease in intake?
So I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
Would the lower foster starts in April and May of this year be a result of the dramatic decrease in intake in those months of April and May for the shelters?
It was not the driving factor of that intake reduction.
No, I think was the intake reduction the driving factor in the lower foster starts?
And I don't really have the insight beyond, you know, the data that we get from PetPoint. I just thought that the foster starts information was important to really look at, because it certainly for me was different than what I was hearing anecdotally. But to know beyond that, I mean, I'm grateful we have the insight that we do because of them making the data available. That's, you know, that's the extent of what we can read from it.
Yeah. Next question, and this is from Michael. Is it possible to know how many shelters are open admission compared to closed admission or limited admission? And I believe you had a slide on that, Vicki.
Oh, in terms of the percentage of data set?
Yeah.
I did. Let me go back because I don't actually have it memorized. So yeah, government animal services is the lion's share of 59%. Shelters with government contract made up 17%, and shelters without a government contract made up 24% of the data set.
And so we can fairly well assume that a government shelter or anyone with a contract is probably at least on some level open admission. A lot of the private shelters, that one will vary quite a bit between limited admission or whether they're completely open admission, but at least gives us a ballpark range for that.
And that's also something that we see a lot of our shelters that do submit narratives for the dashboard. That's a perfect place to talk about that. A lot of our shelters, you know, take that opportunity to really define their operations through that narrative. So we definitely encourage anyone on the phone that hasn't submitted that narrative, please do that. That's where you can have a voice on our dashboard.
So next question, and it's a question / statement. I'm going to try to answer this, Vicki, but you may remember the statistic on it. So if you do, jump in. But it's during COVID, isn't the life-saving gap down because intake is down, which I think is true, because if the animals never appear in the shelter, then they can't end their lives there. So I think that's a big driver of that. But then also as a rescue, we've been taking up the slack of intake since the city shelter has reduced intake. thus our intake has tripled during COVID. And I think one of the really interesting things, Vicki, if you remember this, Shelter Animals Count released their data for the month of May, for April and May. And they were able to break out the difference between organization type, and because all their data included the rescue data, it was very notable that across the board, from a nationwide aggregate, brick and mortar shelter intake was down pretty substantially, but it was basically flat for the rescue communities. So it was meaning that a lot of the rescues were either not seeing the same decreases, or the ones that were being balanced out by the ones that were seeing an intake in it. And so I do think that there is some data to support that. And then oh, hang on, I got a couple more in here. All right. So one of the this is in reference to the Pet Lifesaving Dashboard. So we can use this to refer people for assistance and to adopt as often we have no idea what shelter services them or where they live. So we have no idea where they can go to help for adopt. So can we use this to refer people to shelters in their area?
I totally would, because you could type in the zip code. Like, again, I mentioned to you that I don't live in Florida. So if I know where someone's calling from or what their zip code is and I type it in, I'll be able to see all the shelters that service the area, and even ones close by that don't necessarily service that area. But if someone's willing to go a little bit further, they would be able to see what was there.
So here's one. And Vicki, I know that you did some research on this, so I don't know if you remember it or not. Do you think if there is an economic fallout from the pandemic that we will have to come up with a strategic plan to keep animals with their owners in hard times?
Yeah, so I'll do my best to recall.
It's been a bit.
What's that?
It's been a bit.
Yeah, it's been a bit. It was before 2019 data set clouded my brain with everything. So we did look at that. We were really trying to gather as much data as we could from the 2008 recession and impact. And most of the data sources we had access to didn't go back quite as far as we would have liked them to. So I'm just going to state that as a caveat. But from what we were able to gather and analyze, it did not really have the impact from, an owner relinquishment or intake spiking perspective when we actually went back to look at that, which I want to say we did, Brent, right at the very outset of COVID. Is that right?
Yep.
So it really didn't look as grim, and I hate to say that because that's not a crystal ball, but right, history is all we have to help us predict moving forward. It really didn't look as grim as we, I think, anticipated that it would have.
Yeah,
that's as specific as I can address it without having it in front of me.
Yeah, I think we all expected there to be a dramatic rise in it, and I think it was more or less flat to slightly down, which I think was good. That doesn't mean that we're not still going to have people who are separated from their pets that due to homelessness or being evicted or whatever cause that the economy would have for them having to be separated from their pets. And so I do think that we need to be cognizant of that, as we always would. But I don't think that we're necessarily going to see the dramatic flooding of animals to the shelter system. At least history doesn't tell us that we would see that in the way that many of us fear. But still, it's always ideal to have those programs in place to help people and pets stay together whenever possible. So this is going to be the last one I'm going to get to because we're running a little bit over on time. Considering the euthanasia rates were 2 to 3 million just 10 years ago, what would you say are some of the top reasons where we were able to get to just 625,000 last year?
Are you taking that one, Brent, from a program perspective, or?
I mean, I can tackle it from a program's perspective if you want to take a minute to look at it from a data perspective.
Sure. You start, I'll follow.
So I think, and Vicki will probably validate this with some of the trend data that she'll pull up here, but I think that we've seen a gradual, for the most part, decline in animals coming into the shelter system, which is fantastic. You know, this year was a little bit of a trend in the opposite direction. So that may end, but as fewer animals are coming into the shelter, there's obviously fewer that need to be saved, which makes things a little bit easier for us. But I think the biggest change has been the change and increase in live outcomes. And so we've seen an increase in all live outcomes, from adoptions to animals that are transferred to other rescue groups or across the country. And definitely in recent years, a tremendous increase in return to field programs for community cats, which is going to be a huge life-saving program on the feline side as that becomes more and more commonplace. And so I would say the biggest driver is the increase in live outcomes, with secondary the decrease in intakes. How did I do, Vicki?
You did really good. I've got the numbers pulled up though, if you want me to put numbers against what you just said.
Please.
So we did a trend analysis, which is a little different than data set to data set, because obviously we're gathering more shelter data every year. We're doing these, you know, blended data years. There's a number of reasons why that doesn't work for pure trend. But when we isolated the actually it was almost 1,200 groups that have consistently provided their data to us from 2016 to 2019, here's what we saw over that time horizon. So this is aggregate. We do have it by species and other cuts as well, but this is aggregate. So intake overall from 2016 to 2019 actually went down 6.8%. Live outcomes up almost 11%, 10.9. Deaths, all non-live outcomes, down 37%. And all of that netting out to a 10% increase in save rate.
Awesome. So Vicki, Teresa, thank you all not only for walking us through everything tonight, but for the tremendous work that you all do every day to be sure that we have this data available, not only for the Best Friends team, but to use in our work, but for the community at large to get involved, and so people know how they can get involved and engage in their community. So thank you all for that, but then thank you for sharing that wisdom tonight. If you all would like more information, go check out the Pet Lifesaving Dashboard at the links provided and on the Best Friends page. If you have questions, feel free to plunk around there and find what information you can. Reach out to your regional team if you have additional information or would like to submit your narrative for your shelter. And if you want even more information on this, I think there's some different information that was shared in the Best Friends podcast, so I'll tee that up again. Podcast number 19 is all about the data set, and it was released earlier today. So with that, everyone have a fantastic evening. Thank you all for tuning in, and have a great night.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.